Welcome to Three Thoughts On. Thank you, everybody who's here. Uh, we're always so grateful that you take time away from your busy lives to be here with us. Thank you, Juan Santos and Reese Lynn, for always making the magic work of the video and the transmission and the YouTube live streaming. Today we have a special guest here, Mr. Wayne Alleyne. Wayne, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm nervous.
Yeah, we know. Wayne, we have a great conversation. I'm actually excited to converse about this topic because I know this is a topic that you're very passionate about. But before we get into that, can you give us a little bit of background? Who's Wayne and how did you end up here in Lake Nona doing what you love to do?
All right, so I'm originally from Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. I left the island to study engineering. I wanted to study engineering, civil engineering to be specific. So I went to Savannah State, was part of a Direct Connect program with Georgia Tech. Got hired by Jacobs Engineering. Jacobs Engineering had a program going on here in Orlando, Florida. So I've lived here my entire career. So I've lived here for 17 years. So I've lived in Lake Nona for 17 years. Stayed in some apartments off of Narcoossee Road. Kind of observed that was my first example of a valet trash system, where there's a company that would come pick up trash door to door and then dump it on site at the on-site compactor, right? Paid attention to the process. I didn't think it was lucrative because, it was guys in beat up trucks. Bought a home, a condo to be specific. Started a family. While our single family home was being constructed, we lived in a apartment complex, again, short term, that did not have a valet trash system in place. I realized people don't like to touch trash, right? They would have trash bags on top of their car roof. They would, put it on their trunk, ask me to dump it because I had a truck. And, I started to pay attention to the process. I guess more so from a regulations perspective, right? Because I realized that the compactor was always overflowing. So if it's overflowing, one would assume that it's not working per intention, right? So now you're gonna have increased maintenance, you're gonna have issues. So I started looking into regulations and working with the apartment. Well, my intent was to work with the apartment complex to make them aware of better waste management practices that they could put in place to make the community, more beautiful. So me being a engineer, I knew nothing about business. Started taking classes through SBA, and then I started my company. That was 4 years ago.
Right on. So, civil engineer with a passion for should we say sustainability?
Yes.
Right. So sustainability, at least in my experience, means different things to different people. And I think that maybe that's part of the problem that we face today, because it seems like people go in different directions. When we talk about people, talking about individuals, talking about corporations, talking about communities, local government, state government, federal government, it seems like everybody has their own definition of what sustainability means. According to Wayne, what is sustainability? And let's break that down.
All right, so sustainability pretty much covers three pillars, right? There's the environmental, there's the social/community, and then there's economic. Sustainability to me means something that's self-sustaining, right? You and I speak often about the the pyramid or the Trinity, right? And it has different meanings. I think you like it because it means me, myself, and I. I've heard people talk about past, present, future. Sustainability is just that too, right? Us taking the tools from the past generation, using in the current generation, and keeping it sustainable for the next generation, right? So when we leave the earth, we're leaving it better, either the same or better than we met it. So a sustainable community would be a planned community, similar to one we live in, where you're able to plan in advance and have sustainable tools and processes in place, right? And each community will look different. You need to figure out for your community, what's your niche. I know here in Lake Nona we have Laureate Park, to be specific, we have a community garden, right? And there's been talks about expanding on that. That might be our niche. I'm not sure, right? But I'm just going based on example from what I've seen. I know Costa Rica is big on farming and agriculture. Brazil is big on pig farming, right? And using the manure to help for biofuel and biogas. Different regions, different cities have things that they are great at.
So that's interesting. So correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm reading wrong what you just said. So there's elements of the sustainable model that we get to enjoy right away. Like you said, a planned community. If we do the work, we build the community, we work with the developers, we work with the city, with the county, municipalities, and so forth, we get to enjoy that. But there's an element of having a sustainable process that we don't get to enjoy because we're passing it on to the next generation. It's been my experience that, that makes things difficult because we tend to be a me now kind of society, right? Do you see it that way? Does that make things a little bit challenging for people to do or engage in a process that right up front, or from a funding perspective, right, that it's not going to be reaping benefits right away? Or are most people okay with that part of the model?
I think people want to do the right thing. I think we're so busy in day-to-day life that we don't take the time to actually make sustainability a focus, right, or a priority. A lot of times we wait till it's mandated, all right, if you don't recycle, you're gonna get a fine, before we get up and try to educate ourselves on things that actually would better us, right? As not just a community, but humans.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. So let me ask you, you mentioned the 3 pillars, and you started talking about trash, right? So trash obviously is a business, right? But it is, again, correct me if I'm wrong, keep me honest here, but it seems to be that what we define as trash is not necessarily what you would define as trash. In fact, if I'm correct, a lot of what I would define as trash, you will find that a lot of that could be reused. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so, based on statistics, right, close to about 50% of what you dump daily in your household is food waste that could be reused, right? Another 27, close to about 30% of what you dump can also be recycled, right? Plastics, metal, cardboard, paper, right? So probably truly 20% of what you dump is true trash that cannot be reused or repurposed.
About
and
20%.
I don't think most people know that, right?
So how do we do better? So this starts at home, right? Of course, we depend on our elected officials, we depend on the community developers, we depend on the federal government. Like you said, there's got to be standards. Case in point, example, Hurricane Andrew, right? Back in the early 90s. Those of you who remember, I was here back then. There was a building code that was present at the time, but the building code had to be completely redone after people saw what happened in Homestead, right? And is there a corollary there when it comes to recycling? Because you said, people don't necessarily, some people don't know what to do. Some people recycle things that probably don't need to be recycled, right? And some people throw away things that probably could be recycled, right? So there seems to be like, maybe we need a little bit more education, or maybe the information is out there, we just don't know where it is. And maybe for those who know where the information is, maybe they don't know exactly where to take things to. Can you elaborate a little bit on that from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a gap too, right? Like my kids, that generation, they're very educated. Like if you ask them, they know. But our generation, like I said, I think we try, but we just don't. There's a lack of education, right? So I typically go to, like, I review our city or county or state regulations, right? Like if you go on the City of Orlando website, Orange County, you'll find exactly what you can recycle and where, right? So typically, like plastic, numbers 1 through 5 are what they accept here in Orange County at the landfills. Paint, I think they accept that too, but they accept that at 2 different locations, either the landfill here on the east side, I forgot the road, or the one on the west side off of, I think, no, the east side is Young Pine, and then the dump site on the west side of Orlando. I think both sites accept paint as well. So yeah, our local sites will provide you all that information. I also review, sustainable. I think the website is sustainablecities.com or sustainablenews.com, and that's where I get most of my information of what's recyclable, what's not.
So where are the gaps right now? So we have a community here. Lake Nona is fairly new, right? Is fairly modern when compared to some cities or some other special districts, but there are still gaps, right? I mean, this is not picking on anything. This is just we will always need to be looking to improve. Where are some of those gaps, and what can we do about them? I mean, some of the gaps have to do with us as individuals. Some of the gaps have to do with processes that need to be in place to collect and deliver. And I know that you're involved in some of the new projects that are coming along. So it's like if we can start looking at like, where are we right now? Where do we want to be, say, in 5 years? And what are some of the steps that are going to get us there?
Yeah, so Lake Nona, for a fact, right? We're advanced, right? Because majority of the people who live here are educated. If I had to give a percentage, I'd say over 50% of the people here have a bachelor's degree or higher, right? We have a local podcast, right, where you can come and listen and get information. All of that is part of a sustainable community. Gap, yeah, I would, again, I would say education, right? A lot of people ask me, so Wayne, what can we recycle? I think the biggest misconception of recyclable item would be a pizza box, right? A pizza box can be recycled, but if it doesn't have grease, if it's filled with grease, right? Now it's contaminated, right? So there's good intent to recycle, but now you've contaminated the load once it gets to the landfill. And a couple pizza boxes may not contaminate the entire load, but if the load is contaminated past a percentage, now you've lost the load.
And it becomes trash.
And it becomes trash.
Okay. Well, I did not know that. Are there any other examples like that of things that could contaminate a load?
Yeah, bottle caps
All
by
right.
themselves, right? So bottle caps with the bottles, right? Bottles that are, like I said, plastic between number 1 and 5, or glass, in entirety can be used for recycle, but by itself, it's not recyclable.
Is that right? The cap by itself is not.
Correct.
It has to be attached to the bottle it came from.
Yeah.
Even if if the cap is plastic and the bottle is glass. All right. You writing this down? Okay. So let's go. I want to go back to the beginning of what you said, because you talked about the 3 pillars. And I'd like you to expand a little bit more on the 3 pillars. So if you can remind your definition, because I want to get to that. At some point, I'm going to try to, whether it's comfortable or not, push you a little bit in that direction of what does Wayne want to see, when it comes to sustainability, right? Because we have to have a target, right? So you mentioned 3 pillars. You mention them again for the audience and those who are watching online, and then expand a little bit more on them.
The 3 pillars were environmental, I said community, social, and then economic.
So the environment is basically, how do we use the environment? Does that include how do we build? Whether we build up versus building across, what kind of materials we use, is that where it all goes? In addition to how we dispose of what we consume?
Yeah, reduction of fossil fuels is one, right? Reducing the carbon footprint. Like you're saying, building materials. All that would be incorporated in that.
Okay. How about the economic side?
I don't know a whole lot about that
That's
area.
okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. Just high level.
High level. So again, that would go back to, like, say you're building, right? A facility. Do we use reusable pavers, right? That have a green footprint. That's going to cost $100 a square foot? Or do we go with a brand new green paver that's going to cost $2,000 a square foot, right? I think that's where
Okay.
the economic sustainability comes in place.
And then there's a community side, which we have touched a little bit on. I want to zoom in into that side because I myself learned from you, just like I'm learning right now, some of these misconceptions about what to do with the cap and the pizza box. But it is very popular to have composters at home right now. And it turns out that it's not as easy as people think. Let's talk about, because it turns out that there are people out there, I was one of them, who thought we were doing the right thing and maybe we're not doing the right thing because of what we're putting in there, where we're putting it, and then where we're taking it and what we're doing with it. Can you expand on that, the whole composting model? Because that's something that we should be able to do, on a household basis. Of course, the community can do it at, the community basis, which there are some things, coming up, in the future here. So talk a little bit about that, please.
So I keep looking this way because Commissioner Gray is here. But yeah, if you don't have a composter and you want one, you can go on the City or the county website and you can request one, right? I'm not sure if they actually deliver it or you have to go and pick it up, but it's simple, right? It's easy to assemble. I would say composting is like, it's like cooking, right? Like a soup. There's a chemistry to it, right? Typically, like your seasonings would be like your eggshells, your banana peels. Those are, typical products that you use with your compost. Temperature has a lot to do with it, right? You don't want to exceed, the temperature of exactly what you're trying to compost. You don't want to get too hot or not be hot enough. And then, of course, timing, right? Depending on your type of what you're composting and your compost itself, your equipment, it may be a week, could be 30 days, it may be 60 days. So all of that you need to, make sure you learn and find out about.
Is that a function of additives or is just time? I mean, are there things that you can do to take the 60 days into 7 with specific compounds that accelerate that process?
Correct.
That are safe to be at home
Correct.
and around animals? Okay. All right, so another note. So you can actually request one of these things, and either it gets delivered or you have to go pick it up. Then what happens? So you're composting. I see a lot of people that do composting for themselves because they're using it to enrich their soil, right? But others are basically composting to dispose. So walk me through that process. Like, what do we need to learn from that, and how do we go about it?
Yeah, so you could use it in your yard, right? Vegetable garden. You can grow, plants, vegetables, fruits with this new enriched organic soil, right, that you've created, right? The disposal process is, simple. You can bag it, dispose it.
All right. What else can the community do in order to say that we have a sustainable community? We talked about composting. We talked about recycling. I know recently, you did an international trip, to Denmark to learn some things that may be coming up, in the future here. But that's from a corporate side, but it's also things that we can do. Because as you know, part of what I do with this podcast is not just to inform and to get people over here that can share information, but also to challenge the community, to challenge the people who live here, to challenge us to do better, our developers to do better, our officials to do better. We all have to do our part, right? So, like you said, there was a development process over here that was done. Lake Nona was built from the top up in a way that makes it easier for us to do certain things when compared to other plant communities, right? But you and I know that we can, even though we have that advantage, we're still not doing what we can do. So what I'd like you to take a little bit of time and talk about, okay, what are some of the things we could be doing better in your view? Don't be afraid to challenge people. This is good. And then talk about your trip to Denmark and some of the things that we can look forward to seeing in the near future or midterm.
So before I answer that, right, some of the stuff that I'm seeing too that's upcoming, right, is the development of beep, right? So the first thing that comes to my mind is transportation, right, alternative methods, right? So, right now beep has this, this pilot, I'm gonna call it a pilot study, where it's running up and down Tavistock, right, from Canvas to Boxy to the hospitals to USTA. That's reducing, right, bars on the road. That's one way of, reducing the use of fossil fuels. What else? There's this vertiport that's coming soon, right?
Soon, hopefully sooner than soon.
Yeah. From my understanding, I guess there's some land set aside behind the 7-Eleven near 528. That's supposed to be the potential location for that vertiport. That's also going to reduce our fossil fuel consumption once people are using it. That's another alternative method of transportation. So there are a lot of things here in Lake Nona that are in place already that they, in preparation for the future. Things we could do better that I've seen during, Denmark is probably the #1 happiest place to live in the world, right? So they're
5 years in a row.
Yeah, they're killing it.
Yep.
the cars, they, I guess, if you drive an electric car, it's tax-free. So they don't pay taxes on electric vehicles, right? And that's one way that the government gets, promotes electric vehicles purchase. Also, they have 24/7 transit systems, right? Bus systems that run, and they run off of biofuel. So that would be another way I foresee Orlando progressing in the future, right? Getting away from using the modern gas and going more of the direction of biofuel or even electric, whatever is more economically sustainable.